In this presentation, I want to provide an overview of symbolic anthropological theories which relate to the symbol of hair for the unit symbols and society. So I'll start off with a question. In Australian culture, what do dreadlocks symbolise to you? I know when I was in the 1990s, I had a mate called Rick, and we'd go to parties, a whole bunch of us with Rick. And when we got there, Rick was like the life of the party. We're like, "Hey man, come over here," and they'd give him like marijuana joints and beers and stuff, and he'd be really celebrated because of his dreadlocks. And we all thought it was kind of funny because for us, Rick was just one of the guys. He wasn't really that different to any of us, but the dreadlocks seemed to be really attractive to women and exciting to other guys. So he was treated very well at parties. So what do dreadlocks symbolise to you? What do you think they symbolised to people back in the 1990s when I was going to parties? Why do you think women tend to wear their hair longer than men? You probably see that all around you these days. And what you might also see around, though in declining numbers, is how do you explain hipster beards and short cut head hair? You see the hipsters got their long, well maintained beards and then short cut hair. And why do old school bikies and hippies wear long flowing hair? There's a picture of some hippies. Also, why are young men shaving their bodies these days? If you go to the gym, you'll see a lot of footy guys who play AFL footy who are like kind of like the apex of masculinity, dominant, or what people call hegemonic masculinity. And they shave their arms and legs and maybe other parts of their body I don't know about. Why would they do that? When I was a boy, that was considered, that'd be like a laughable idea, almost a bit off-putting, a bit, we would say it was a bit freaky and yucky. Anyway, so what has changed? Why? Well, the anthropology of symbols can help answer these questions, and you can use some of the theoretical approaches, at least 3 in your essay, if you want to look at such questions in relation to hair. But of course, you'll check with me first. So let's start off with some of these theories. For Fraser, the power of cut hair derived from the sacredness of the head in many cultures. Where I do field work in Indonesia and in the Cocos-Keeling Islands, the head and the foot, like in Australia, the head's more important than the foot, you could generally say. You tend to, for example, kiss someone's cheek and not go down and kiss their foot when you meet them, or etc., etc. Now, aside from those tendencies, in Indonesia it's much stronger. So you would only ruffle a kid's hair if you really knew them quite well, and you would definitely avoid your foot touching somebody else's body. And even the way you sit, you wouldn't want your foot pointing towards another person, so you'd sit cross-legged or just in such a way that you wouldn't offend somebody by pointing your legs at them. So this we have it in the West, but it's even more poignant, if you like, in Malay societies where I do field work. So using Fraser's theory, we could say that our prehistoric ancestors believed in magical contagion. The hair is very important, and when you cut your hair, that hair remains in contact with the head. So, for example, to avoid bad magic, in certain cultures, you'll take care to burn your own hair or dispose of it carefully so that a witch or a sorcerer couldn't get a hold of it. And the idea is that these beliefs survive as symbols. So it's quite common in our culture to keep the child's first lock of hair. So when my parents cut my hair, they kept the first lock of hair and put it in an envelope, which probably sits somewhere in a collection of other stuff like old photos and whatnot of me. And Fraser would probably relate this to the idea of the safekeeping of the soul, like in that Malay tale, how the Malay merchant put his daughter's soul in a goldfish for safekeeping. so that when the evil step tried to kill her, she remained. She did not die because her soul was kept safe. And we can also relate that further to like Balder, the myth of Balder and the King of the Wood, the rites of Nemi, where the thing that keeps their soul safe, the mistletoe, is where Balder's soul is kept, or where the priest's soul is kept. That's the thing that can actually kill them. So we can go further with that. So in the same way, my hair, which my parents keep safe, is actually the same thing that can be used to kill me. And so we see symbolic survivals, if you like, of ancient beliefs. So Fraser would say something like, that is the example. The safekeeping of Nick's hair is a symbolic survival of ancient beliefs that the soul resides in the hair. Or he would say something like that. Okay, so Fraser's the first theorist we look at. The second theorist we look at in the course is Durkheim. Now, Durkheim is mostly concerned with symbols that we hold very dear and that we can rally around. So if you wanted to use if you want to use a Durkheimian approach, this is a kind of limitation of Durkheim. You've got to find symbols that are held dear and things we rally around. Maybe Rick's dreadlocks, possibly. I'm not sure if that's going to really work. I don't think it's a strong enough example because I don't think it's held to be sacred or held dear. But you might be able to find an example from another culture, but I haven't, so I'm just useful to my essay on hair. But I do have to look at Berg, who wrote a book in 1951 as a psychoanalyst and not as a professional anthropologist. His thesis was that in civilized societies, unsociable desires are repressed. So in England in 1950, it's all your desires to run up and hump people or to poo wherever you want and eat whatever you can get are repressed. In fact, you act very politely. And this repression of what you call libidinal desires or urges causes neurosis. You don't get neurosis in primitive societies. I'll just add that. Because primitive societies express desires in rituals. And you can see this in relation to hair. Because hair, according to Berg, symbolizes the phallus, the penis. As Leach explains it, for Berg, hair cutting and shaving are to be understood as symbolic castration. Or as Berg puts it, in shaving and hair cutting, we abreact our aggression by directing it against our aggressive hair. Abreact generally refers to when you have a breakthrough moment with your psychologist or psychiatrist. And you go, oh, aha, it was my mother after all. I feel great now. That's what an abreaction is supposed to be. I think Berg is using it in a different sense here. Maybe just, we should say, acting out our emotion. So in hair shaving and hair cutting, we act out our emotion of our aggression by directing it against our aggressive hair. So, to put it in my terms, when I cut my hair, I'm saying to my unruly, unconscious desires, I reject you. I renounce your impulses. I'm clean! Exclamation mark. Exclamation. I am clean. So, he gives some examples of this. He talks about the Great Rebellion, as it's sometimes called, or the English Civil War, Um, to wrap all this up briefly, in the mid 1600s there was a war. Two of the main contenders were the Roundheads, and the Cavaliers. The Roundheads are identified by hair cut shorter, and Cavaliers are characterized by glorious, luscious locks. Now, the Roundheads were against the king and against the Church of England, and for little churches like Baptist and Protestants, small scale, against the large, big church, for small churches. And these guys were for the Church of England and for the king. Hurrah! Now, these guys were Puritans. The Roundheads, the short-cut head people, were Puritans. They rejected. They were pretty strict actually. There was no. They didn't really like music all that much. They didn't like festivities. They hated Christmas. Whereas these guys loved to live it up. Bring on the champagne. Bring on the women. Bring on the song. Now, Berg says that their hair symbolizes this. Roundheads, like Cromwell here, cut off his hair, and that symbolized cutting off his own penis, which to his unconsciously, which is an unconscious attempt to reject his libidinal urges to have sex, to eat, to fornicate, and whereas this guy, frothing at the lips, looking at the luscious women and fruit, indulges his libido. He gratifies his penis and he glories in his hair. The struggle of the early 17th century, it was the mid-1600s, mid-17th century, but anyway, between Cavaliers and Roundheads is an interesting representation of the conflict between sexual libido, probably there he means id, and superego. Now I should explain that for Freud, the mind has a conscious and unconscious and possibly also preconscious element. Within the unconscious structure of the mind, there's another structure which is underneath. The unconscious mind is composed of a id, which is your desires either to fornicate and also to kill. So somebody pulls in front of you at the lights, your id tells you, get out and kill that son of a gun. And you're unconsciously thinking this. You're not even conscious of this. Your superego is saying, oh, that might not be a good idea. In fact, you're a very bad boy. No, very bad. Don't go kill people. And your ego is saying, well, why don't we compromise here and beep the horn? And maybe that idea might go up through your conscious mind and you might even beep the horn. So, we all have this kind of unconscious struggle going on all the time. You see someone who's attractive to you, part of you wants to run up, jump on top of that person and fornicate. The other part of you is thinking, you disgusting, filthy animal. And then that's your id and your superego, and your ego is coming along and saying, come on, let's be reasonable. Maybe go and talk to that person, and maybe you can strike up some sort of romantic relationship. Okay, so the Cavaliers, who wore their hair long, indulged in women and wine, and generally expressed their libidinous impulses. They gave in to the id. The Roundheads, who cuts their hair short, were Puritans. Symbolically and mentally, they cut off their penis, albeit they assumed substitutive and compensatory aggression, which by that Cromwell was an incredible warmonger. In the end, he basically won the war, but basically won the Great Revolt. Okay, so that's two examples. One is cutting the hair, and one is sort of glorying in your hair. One is cutting your hair. Now another one is rejecting your hair. That's what or ignoring your hair. So go through again. Cutting hair, glorying in hair, now ignoring hair. And this is like the example of the Hindu ascetic who allows his hair to grow long, matted, and full of lice. So for ascetics are people who remove themselves from society, renounce sex, renounce food, and live a life of piety and reflection, typically. They also sometimes are involved in some mysticism. And in the Hindu ascetic tradition and other ascetic traditions, they ignore their hair, which for Berg, let it grow long in form of what we would call dreadlocks, which for Berg is a form of rejecting the penis, which is an idea that that he represses his libido, that the ascetic represses his libido. So we should note that cutting or ignoring their hair is similar because it's a rejection of libidinal energy, but it's from a different strategy. The Roundhead cuts it off. The ascetic ignores it. Fakirs, that ascetics, ignore altogether the very existence of their hair. Compare the ascetic tendency to ignore the existence of their genital organs. It grows into a matted, lice-inhabited mass and may almost be as much a source of unremitting torment as the neglected penis itself. Apparently, it is not permitted to exist as far as the consciousness is concerned. So forget about cutting it off. I'm just going to ignore it altogether. So for Berg, haircutting and shaving are to be understood as symbolic castration. In shaving and haircutting, we abreact against our aggression by directing it against our aggressive hair. So when I cut my hair, oh Jesus, I'm repeating myself here. I'm saying to myself, to my unruly unconscious desire, I reject you, I announce you, I am clean. Sorry, went backwards there. Okay, so that's the summary. Now, this idea, Berg's book probably annoyed a lot of psychoanalysts for its crude representation of Freud's ideas. It certainly annoyed anthropologists, and Berg was unlucky enough to annoy one of the great anthropologists, Leach. So Leach responds to this, condescends to respond to this popularized book, and says in some profound lecture, symbols have a personal emotional content. A symbol creates private and unconscious feelings and thoughts, and psychologists can study these because these thoughts and feelings are symptoms of unconscious traumas. So in Australian society, milk is generally thought of as something associated with the mother, with fertility, with goodness, with fecundity. However, I personally might have drunk too much milk once and got so sick that I could never touch it again and almost died. Maybe the milk was off. So I would have an unconscious trauma that's associated with that. And maybe a psychiatrist or a psychologist could help me work through that trauma of almost dying and the associations and maybe the phobia I have of milk. At the same time, I would understand the meaning that the rest of society gives to it as a fertile and fecund thing, and how difficult it makes being in Australia when everybody thinks of milk like that, and yet for me it has such a personal and vivid traumatic association. In that example, by the way, anthropologists would be interested in milk as a symbol of fertility, of the mother, of fecundity, and that kind of stuff. Whereas psychologists would be interested in the personal trauma. So Leach then turns to the hair symbol. And he says this conveys a public meaning. And there's the public social meaning. This is what anthropologists study. And it may contrast with what a person actually feels. It might contrast with their private and unconscious thoughts, which is what a psychoanalyst studies. So privately, rituals such as hair cutting or symbols such as dreadlocks might have personal psychosexual significance. But hair cutting might equal castration for an individual person. But this is different from the public meaning. So psychology is concerned with the private meaning of symbolic symbols, and anthropology is concerned with the public. And this ties in nicely with Geertz's theory, which we'll look at later, namely that culture is shared symbols. So that's Geertz's idea. Okay. So now Leach goes on to attack Berg's treatment of the Roundheads and the Cavaliers. He says, so when you send out, when you're cutting your hair, what you're doing is sending a public message about what is supposed to be the case, not what is actually the case. So Roundheads who followed Cromwell, the ones who cut their hair short like Cromwell, were supposed to be strict and austere Puritans. It doesn't mean that every single Roundhead was like that. In fact, some Roundheads might have been womanizing, wine-drinking, free-loving gentlemen. But the message they wanted to send out was that they were austere and puritanical, so they cut their hair short. It's the same on the Trobriand Islands, where Malinowski famously did his research. On the Trobriands, if somebody close to me dies, I'm supposed to shave my hair to show grief. That's because if you're a bereaved person on the Trobriands, you're supposed to feel grief, and the way you show that is by cutting your hair. However, it might be that the person who died, my cousin or something, was my enemy and I hated him. So I might not actually feel that, but yet still cut my hair to symbolically say to the world, I'm feeling grief. So the individual personality might have a very different feeling to what they should be. So a Hindu ascetic wears long matted hair, and this is a public symbol. He's not doing it as some sort of neurotic symptom. He's actually going out there and communicating to everybody, look, I am literally neglecting my penis. So for a sannyasin, for a Hindu ascetic, the hair is a public statement. It's not a private or neurotic idiosyncrasy. And more to the point, symbols are not repressed in civilized societies anyway. India is a civilization. It was a civilization long before there was any civilization in England. Sorry. In India, there were civilizations long before there were any civilizations in England. There's a long and complex history of civilization in India. And they do not repress, even though they are civilized, they do not repress libidinal symbols. I should change that. The famous example is linga, which are penis symbols, and yoni, which are vagina symbols, and they look like penises and vaginas. I'll just get up some images. Here's an image from Candi Suku, which is in East Java near where I do fieldwork. And this is a linga, and what we call a linga and a yoni. This is from the period where Indian civilization was very strong in Java. And you can see the linga, this is a penis, and this is a yoni, this is a vagina. So the symbolism is explicit, it's graphic, and it's public. It's not a reflection of some private, repressed meaning. Not private, repressed, idiosyncratic, or neurotic meaning. Repressed. All right. That's Hall's idea. That's Leach's idea. Let's now move on to Hall-Pike. Hall-Pike, writing in 1969, has a much simpler idea about what hair symbolizes. Basically, cutting hair symbolizes submission to control or authority. Long hair for him symbolizes freedom, and this is supposed to be a universalistic theory that's supposed to work in a variety of cultures. He doesn't rely, he's moved right away from all this psychoanalytical stuff of Berg, and even moved on from Leach in a sense. He's just looking at universal significance of cutting hair. Wherever you are, long hair equals freedom. If it's the ascetic who lives out in the forest, or the monk who doesn't, you have monks who, you have hermits who, the hermit who lives in the forest, he or she grows her hair long. Bikies and rockers, they're free from, and Elvis, before he got his hair cut here, was a rocker. He was free from, he had long hair, and was free from authority. However, when Elvis joins the army, he famously got his hair cut, and hair cutting symbolizes submission. So when you become a monk, when you're a novice, you get your hair cut. When you join the army, that happens too. Where else does it happen? I guess I'll take the example of my field work. And this is, I won't. I'll come back to that some other time. Okay, so cut hair is like submission. That's another theory. Now we'll move on to Douglas, who has another theory, who talks about, we'll deal with later in the course. For Douglas, holiness comes from wholeness and completeness. She's looking at what is considered holy in the Bible and what's considered disgusting and defiling. And whatever is holy is whole. And things that transgress classifications, we'll come to this later, are thought of as disgusting. So, for example, I have a pot plant at home. If the soil of the pot plant is contained within the pot, that's clean because the soil belongs there. It's clean, it's good. As soon as the soil and stuff drops out onto the table or onto the floor, it becomes disgusting, or not disgusting, but needs to be cleaned up. Okay, I'm not embarrassed if my friends come around, or if my parents-in-law come around and the soil is in the pot, but as soon as it goes out, that's same. And if a cockroach runs across the floor, I'm also embarrassed because that's disgusting and filthy in my consideration. In my society, there are things that belong on the outside, like flies and cockroaches, But when they transgress that border and go inside, that becomes filthy and disgusting. Similarly, a bird that flies into my house is potentially a cause of contagion and filth, but a bird that I put in a pot, in a cage, then becomes confined and safe and not disgusting. So, in other words, what is disgusting is what transgresses boundaries or classifications. Holiness is wholeness, we could say, and cut hair is not whole but separate. Now, I think what I'm doing here is just applying Douglas. I don't remember Douglas actually talking about hair. So we're just going to use Douglas's theory to try and explain something about hair. Also, hair is kind of strange. Hair is not alive, yet it grows. It is part of the body, yet not. For example, it doesn't hurt to cut hair. So it's a funny kind of belongs in a funny category for us, with the way we categorize ourselves and our bodies. Hair is a bit strange, like nails. So there are a couple of things that emerge from that. We don't know whether it's live or dead, because we have these categories, live or dead, and hair and nails don't fit in there. Now, once we cut them, it becomes even worse, because waiter, there's a fly in my soup. You don't like flies because they transgress categories. But also getting hair in your food is really, for a lot of people, quite an icky thing. We don't mind eating dead meat. We're eating a hamburger that's got dead meat in it, dead animal. But if a bit of the hair gets into it, it's like, we get grossed out. Hair from the animal itself, like chicken feathers, or from somebody who cooked it. So the problem with hair is this sort of, for us, is it transgresses boundaries between live and dead. When we cut it, it doesn't belong to the body, yet it belongs to the body. So we might also use Douglas. Now, Douglas might do this herself. I can't remember whether Douglas does this or it's just me. Transgressors such as adulteresses have their hair cut. So, like, for example, as you probably all know, in World War II, as the Allies advanced into Nazi-occupied areas, the local girlfriends of the occupying Nazis had their head shaved to show that they were discussing adulteresses and so on. Priests have their hair cut to purify themselves. So hair is thought of as impure, and cutting it makes you purer. So that's what we can do with Douglas. The next theorist, and I'm getting tired, so I'll have to hurry up a bit, is Obersekra, and he does directly deal with hair. And his book's called Medusa's Hair. Medusa, as you know, is a figure of from Greek mythology. Her hair was transformed into serpents, and she has a famous battle with Perseus, which could be seen as the battle of the penises from this painting. Perseus has got Medusa's head there. Her hair is serpents, or if you like, according to the theories of Berg, and in fact Leach would agree that hair symbolises penises. For Berg, it symbolises penises unconsciously. For Leach, it's consciously symbolises penises. And there's Perseus with his big sword, which is also supposed to be a phallic symbol. That's just me reading it in. I don't think Obersekra talks about that. But what Obersekra does talk about is Karunavati, who is a woman who was treated badly by her husband. She became possessed. Then she renounced sex and her husband, and her hair became matted. She referred to her hair as a penis. She talked about her dreadlocks that grew as buds of flesh or peonies stuck on the head. What Obersekra is saying is, what Karunavati is doing is there's a public meaning of the hair as a rejection of the penis, but there's also a private rejection of the penis. And I'll just note that. So to put it another way, growing hair is a public rejection of the penis. That is, everybody in Karunavati's world refers to the dreadlocks as peonies. But it is also a private rejection of the penis. Growing hair has a deep personal meaning for Karunavati. So this is a rejection of Leach's idea. Symbols can operate on both a personal private level and on a Control Shift F3 and Shift F3 and on public social levels. Leach should have recognized that the emotional, psychological, personal, and the social, anthropological, and public are connected. Okay, now moving on to the last slide, Maggio. Maggio joins the debate in 1994 with her work Hairdos and Don'ts, Hair Symbolism and Hair and Sexual History in Samoa. What she's trying to do actually there is most of the other previous accounts are kind of look at one point in time. They're static. They what you could call synchronic. Some people call it synchronic, which means looking at phenomena and how they interact at one point in time. She wants to make a diachronic or historical account of hair symbolisms. She looks at the rules for hairdos that pertain to young women in pre-contact Samoa and compares that with contemporary Samoa, with later Samoa. And she says the hairdos parallel the do's and don'ts for their sexual behaviour. Moral codes written on the body entail balances between license and constraint, she writes. The girl's hairdo in Old Samoa signified such a balance. Her reddened lock represented the degree of license she enjoyed in flaunting, while her shaved head represented the degree of restraint she was expected to exercise in marrying. So at the same time, I think she'd have a reddened lock and a shaved hair, and that would symbolise the balances she was supposed to have. All right, it's been long. Thank you for your patience if you got this far. The main point is that the main point of this lecture was to show how different theoretical approaches can be applied to hair, and to give you some inspiration for your essay. A lot of the information I've covered you won't understand unless you've done the whole course, Symbols in Society, or most of it at least. So you'll need to look at other writers that have come up in the course of the unit. You might consider, after checking with me, whether you want to look at different myths such as Samson and Perseus, and also look at some current rituals such as getting Brazilians a way of shaving female pubic hair.